Lancaster, California, a quiet desert city just north of Los Angeles, where long stretches of sand meet the endless blue sky and suburban neighborhoods rest under the stillness of the Mojave wind. It's a place where families dream of peace, safety, and a steady life away from the chaos of the city. And in one of those quiet neighborhoods lived a woman named Sheylla Cabrera, a 33-year-old mother of three who, on the surface, seemed to have everything together. She had a warm smile, soft eyes that always carried kindness, and a voice that comforted everyone around her. But beneath that calm and gentle exterior, Sheylla's life was unraveling in silence. For years, she had tried to make her marriage work. Her husband, Sheylla Cabrera Cornejo, was a man she once loved deeply, the father of her children, her partner in everything. But lately, the home that was supposed to be her safe space had become a place of fear and tension. Friends and family noticed she was withdrawing, that her laughter had faded. When they asked, she smiled faintly and said she was tired, that everything was fine. But those close to her knew something wasn't right. She had begun confiding in a few trusted friends, telling them about arguments, control, and moments that made her feel trapped. She wanted to believe things would get better, that the man she once loved would change. But deep down, she was losing that hope. The Cabreras lived in a small apartment complex surrounded by desert shrubs and narrow parking spaces where kids often played after school. To neighbors, they were just another family, a mother, a father, and three young children. No one knew that behind closed doors, Sheylla had been quietly planning to leave. She had started looking for a new place to live, somewhere safe for her and the kids. She had even spoken to her parents about it. It wasn't an easy decision, but she felt she had no other choice. She was done living in fear. In early August 2025, Sheylla told a friend that she was preparing to tell Josimar the truth, that she wanted a separation. She wanted peace, stability, and safety for her children. That conversation would become one of her last. On August 9th, 2025, she spoke to her family on the phone. She sounded calm, a little nervous, but determined. She promised to visit them soon, but the very next day, communication stopped. Calls went unanswered. Messages were left unread. Her phone, which she always kept close, suddenly went silent. At first, no one panicked. Maybe she was busy with the kids. Maybe her phone had died. But as hours turned into days, her family's worry grew heavier. They tried calling Josimar, but he gave vague answers. He said she was fine, that she had gone somewhere to clear her head. Something about his tone felt wrong, too casual, too distant. On August 12th, when Sheylla still hadn't returned calls or posted anything online, her family reported her missing. Police began searching, hoping this was just a misunderstanding. But the fear in her mother's voice told another story. Detectives arrived at the Cabrera apartment. It was clean, almost too clean. No signs of struggle, no signs of packing, no signs of a woman preparing to leave. Her purse was there, her clothes, her makeup, everything. It didn't make sense. A mother of three doesn't simply walk away from her life without a trace. Officers asked Josimar where she might have gone, but his story kept changing. One moment he said she went for a drive, the next he said she might be visiting a friend. There was a nervousness in his eyes that didn't sit right with the investigators. Something was deeply off. Days later, detectives pulled security camera footage from around the apartment complex. What they found made their hearts drop. In the early morning hours around 4 a.m., the cameras showed Josimar dragging something heavy, wrapped in what appeared to be fabric or a large blanket, out of the apartment. The object was the size of a human body. He loaded it into his vehicle and drove off into the darkness. He returned hours later, empty-handed. There was no sign of Sheylla after that. When the footage was shown to her family, their world shattered. The woman they had been searching for, praying for, might never come home again. Police immediately named Josimar a person of interest, but before they could arrest him, he vanished, taking all three of their children with him. Their apartment was abandoned, the car was gone, and somewhere in the vast desert stretching from Lancaster to the Angeles National Forest, a young mother's body waited to be found. For nearly a week, search teams combed the dry canyons, the dirt trails, and the rocky cliffs of the forest. It was an area both haunting and beautiful, a place where the wind howls through the pines and the silence feels endless. Then deep down a steep embankment off a remote trail, they found what they had feared most. Wrapped in the same kind of material seen in the security footage, the remains of Sheylla Cabrera lay hidden beneath layers of brush and dust. She was gone, brutally taken from her children, her family, and her future. Back in Lancaster, candles began to appear outside her apartment door. Photos of Sheylla and her children, flowers, and handwritten notes filled the small walkway. Neighbors who barely knew her stood in tears. "She was so kind," one whispered, always smiling. Across social media, her friends began sharing her story, demanding justice. The community mourned, but anger simmered beneath the grief. How could someone who claimed to love her do this? How could anyone harm the mother of their own children? Meanwhile, authorities launched an international search. Reports emerged that Josimar had fled the country, possibly to Peru, his home nation, taking the children with him. The FBI and Interpol became involved. An extradition warrant was issued. But as of those first few days after her discovery, the world still didn't know where he was. What they did know was that Sheylla's final moments must have been terrifying. A woman trapped between hope and horror, trying to protect her children from the man she once trusted. Her parents could barely speak when reporters asked them for comments. Her mother's voice broke as she said, she wanted to live. She wanted to start over that dream. The one she had whispered about, the one she had nearly reached, was gone in an instant. And as the sun set over Lancaster that week, painting the desert sky in red and gold, her story began to spread across America. A story of love that turned into fear, of a promise that turned into tragedy, and of a mother who deserved so much more than the silence she received. The discovery of Sheylla Cabrera's body changed everything. What began as a missing person investigation had now become a homicide case, one that would send ripples far beyond Lancaster. Detectives who had been holding on to hope now stood at the edge of a crime scene deep within Angeles National Forest, surrounded by silence and heartbreak. The ground was uneven, covered in pine needles and dust. Officers spoke quietly among themselves, documenting every detail, collecting what was left of a life that had been taken far too soon. The air was heavy, the mood even heavier. Sheylla was no longer missing. She was gone, murdered, discarded, and left in the wilderness as if her existence could be erased. Back in town, news spread fast. Local stations began airing her story, showing pictures of a smiling woman with 3 children. People couldn't believe it. The comments poured in, messages of shock, grief, and anger. "How could this happen here?" neighbors asked. Lancaster wasn't used to cases like this. It was the kind of quiet suburb where people went to build a future, not to destroy one. But evil doesn't care about the setting. It hides behind closed doors, wearing a mask of normalcy until it finally explodes. The police department immediately turned its focus on one man, Josimar Cabrera Cornejo, Sheylla's husband. He had already disappeared, taking their 3 children with him. To investigators, that was more than suspicious. It was a confession without words. The timeline was becoming clearer now. The night Sheylla vanished, the security footage caught Josimar leaving the apartment with a heavy object. Hours later, Sheylla's car was found abandoned, and Josimar's phone went dark. It was as if he had planned every move in advance. He had time, motive, and opportunity. Detectives started piecing together his final days before the murder. They found out that Josimar had been growing increasingly paranoid and controlling. Friends of the family told officers that Sheylla had been trying to separate, that she had told him she was done, that she wanted out of the marriage. For Josimar, that was unacceptable. To a man obsessed with control, losing the woman he believed he owned was worse than death itself. In his twisted mind, if she wasn't going to be his, she wasn't going to be anyone's. As the manhunt began, the FBI joined the case. Alerts were issued nationwide, and airports were notified. But Josimar was already gone. He had crossed the border with his children, slipping into Mexico, and from there, investigators believed he had fled to Peru. The children, ages 9, 6, and 4, were with him, likely terrified and confused. The thought of those kids in a foreign country, in the hands of the man who might have killed their mother, chilled everyone working the case. At Sheylla's vigil, Hundreds gathered. The air was filled with candles, prayers, and tears. Her parents stood near a photo collage showing Sheylla with her kids, smiling faces that now felt like ghosts frozen in time. Her mother's voice trembled as she spoke to reporters. She loved her children more than anything. She was trying to protect them, but those words only deepened the pain, because protecting them was exactly what she died trying to do. Meanwhile, detectives kept digging into the couple's life. They discovered a history of domestic disputes, arguments, reports of control, and emotional manipulation. Friends said Sheylla had tried to leave before, but had always gone back, hoping things would change. She was a believer in second chances, in forgiveness. But forgiveness can be dangerous when it's offered to someone who doesn't deserve it, and Josimar had proved that. Digital forensics teams began analyzing Shella's phone and social media. They found deleted messages, half-written notes, and recent searches about divorce and safety planning. She had even messaged a friend just days before her death, saying she was scared but determined. It was as if she knew something was coming. She felt the storm building, but she didn't know it would strike so soon. In Peru, authorities began receiving information through Interpol. U.S. officials worked tirelessly with Peruvian law enforcement to confirm his location. They believed he was hiding with distant relatives, using cash and avoiding public contact. But every lead took time. Every rumor led to another dead end. The children's safety became the top priority. The FBI released photos of all four, Josimar and the three kids, asking for the public's help. Posters went up at airports, border checkpoints, and embassies. As investigators pursued him across borders, back home, the community demanded justice. They wanted answers, accountability, and closure. Candlelight vigils turned into rallies. Domestic violence survivors came forward, saying Shella's story reminded them of their own. Her death became a symbol of a larger issue, one that too many people tried to ignore. She did everything right, a family friend said. She tried to get help. She tried to leave. And still, she was killed. The more detectives learned, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't a moment of rage. It was premeditated. Josimar had waited for the right time, a night when the children were asleep, when no one was watching. He knew how to hide her body, how to clean the apartment, how to leave before sunrise. Every step was deliberate. It wasn't love, it was control, cruelty, and the cold calculation of a man who couldn't stand to lose. Back at the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office, investigators met day after day, tracking updates from abroad, reviewing evidence, and coordinating with the district attorney's office. A murder charge was officially filed. Even though the suspect was still on the run, prosecutors were ready. The extradition process was set in motion, but it could take months. For now, the focus was on locating him and bringing the children home safely. One officer who had worked the case from the beginning said it best. You could feel her presence in every room. Even in death, she guided this case. It was like she was saying, "Don't let him get away." And so, they didn't stop. They couldn't. Every clue, every piece of evidence was another whisper from Sheylla, another push to find the truth. News outlets across the country began following the story closely. Interviews with domestic violence advocates filled television screens. Experts discussed how abusers often act when they feel they're losing control, that leaving an abusive relationship is statistically the most dangerous time for the victim. That truth hit hard, because Sheylla had tried to do everything right. She had confided in friends, planned an exit, protected her children. And yet, it still wasn't enough to save her. While the legal system worked across continents, the Cabrera family faced the unbearable task of saying goodbye. At her funeral, held just 2 weeks after her body was found, the church overflowed with people. Her coffin was surrounded by photographs, her holding her children, laughing with her parents, smiling under the California sun. Her mother whispered through tears, "You're free now, mi niña. No one can hurt you anymore." The sound of sobbing filled the church. Friends hugged one another, strangers wiped their eyes. Even detectives who had worked the case stood silently in the back, their heads bowed. Justice hadn't come yet, but the fight for it had only just begun. Outside, as the sun began to set, the desert wind carried a quiet promise that her story wouldn't be forgotten, that her voice would still be heard, even in silence. And somewhere far away, across borders and oceans, the man who took her life was hiding, unaware that the world was closing in on him. The story of Sheylla Cabrera was no longer just a local tragedy. It had become a global pursuit for justice. A mother's memory turned into a movement, and as investigators traced his steps and the children's location, one thing became clear. No matter how far he ran, the truth was coming for him. Thousands of miles away from Lancaster, the story of Sheylla Cabrera was echoing through newsrooms, social media, and courtrooms. Her face, once known only to family and friends, had now become a symbol of courage, heartbreak, and the silent suffering of countless victims. The woman who had once lived quietly in a small California neighborhood had become the center of an international manhunt, her name spoken with both love and rage. In Lima, Peru, law enforcement had begun working closely with American authorities. The FBI's extradition request was moving through legal channels, slow but steady. Tips began to pour in from across South America. Sightings of a man traveling with 3 young children, staying in small motels, always paying in cash, avoiding eye contact, and never staying longer than a few days. Locals described him as nervous, as if he was waiting for something terrible to happen. And in a way, he was, because justice was coming for him. Back in the U.S., the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office formally charged Sheylla Cabrera Cornejo with murder. They had enough evidence, the surveillance footage, digital records, witness statements, and forensic results from the crime scene. Even without him present, the case was airtight. But what the prosecutors wanted wasn't just conviction, they wanted his capture. They wanted to look him in the eyes in a courtroom and make him face the weight of what he'd done. Weeks passed, then months. The search for the children became the heartbeat of the investigation. The thought of them living with the man who had killed their mother haunted everyone. The FBI released updated images of the kids, using digital aging to help the public identify them if spotted. Interpol alerts went out. International posters displayed their faces under the bold letters. Missing, believed to be with suspect in murder case. And then one morning, a lead came in. Peruvian authorities received a report of a man matching Josimar's description, living on the outskirts of a rural town near Cusco. He was quiet, rarely spoke, and had 3 children with him, all looking American. Officers began surveillance immediately. They watched from a distance, confirming what they already suspected. The man rarely went out, but when he did, his eyes darted constantly, as if afraid that the world might recognize him. When the arrest came, it was swift. Early one dawn, as the mist rolled over the rooftops, Peruvian police moved in. Sheylla Cabrera Cornejo was taken into custody without resistance. The children, frightened and confused, were placed under protective care. Within hours, the news broke across the United States. He's been caught. For Sheylla's family, the words were bittersweet. The pain of loss never left. But knowing he was finally in custody brought a quiet sense of peace. Justice was closer now than ever. Back in Lancaster, the community gathered again. This time not for mourning, but for remembrance. Candles were lit once more, but there was a different energy in the air. People spoke her name with pride. Her story had saved others. Since her case went public, several local organizations reported an increase in women seeking help from domestic violence hotlines. Her story had given others the courage to speak. Sheylla's voice, though silenced by violence, had become a beacon for those still trapped in silence. The prosecutors began the extradition process. In a press conference, one of them said, "We will not rest until he stands trial here, on the soil where he took her life." Those words spread everywhere. Headlines, broadcasts, podcasts, each one carrying a promise that this time, justice wouldn't be delayed. Sheylla's parents finally got to see their grandchildren again through a video call arranged by authorities. The children were safe, being cared for by professionals, and one day they would return home. But even through the screen, the pain was visible. The oldest child asked where their mother was. Her grandmother's voice trembled as she said, "She's with God now, watching over you." Those words broke hearts across the world, because in that moment, it wasn't just the story of a crime. It was the story of a family torn apart, of innocence stolen too soon. Months later, as the legal proceedings continued, the story of Sheylla Cabrera continued to inspire conversations about protection, awareness, and change. Advocacy groups began using her name in campaigns, urging women and men alike to recognize the signs of abuse, to speak out, to seek help before it's too late. Her death had become more than a tragedy, it had become a call to action. Her friends would sometimes post old photos, smiling selfies, birthday celebrations, her holding her children at the park. The comments were full of heartbreak and love. "We miss you, Sheylla. You didn't deserve this. We'll keep fighting for you." Those words became her digital memorial, a place where love lived on even after everything else was gone. When Josimar finally appeared before a Peruvian court for extradition hearings, he looked nothing like the confident man seen in old photos. His hair was unkempt, his eyes hollow. The world saw him for what he was. Not a husband, not a father, but a murderer who had destroyed the very thing he claimed to love. The process would take time, but it was clear. Justice was inevitable. In Lancaster, the small memorial outside the apartment still stood. Someone had placed fresh flowers there, along with a handwritten note that said, "You are free now." And in many ways she was. Free from pain, free from fear, free from the man who tried to silence her. But her story remained, echoing in every home, every heart that heard it. Because Sheylla Cabrera's voice was no longer just hers, it belonged to everyone who ever felt trapped, afraid, or unheard. The narrator's voice fades as soft piano music plays. If you or someone you know is facing domestic violence, it says, please don't stay silent. In the U.S., call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 800-799-7233. Help is available, and you are not alone. The camera pans slowly over the candles, the photos, the faces of a community that refuses to forget. Her smile appears one last time, frozen in a moment of peace. The music rises, the screen darkens, and the final words appear, "Justice for Sheylla." And as the scene fades to black, the narrator's voice returns softly. The familiar close of a true crime channel, but with weight and purpose this time. If this story touched you, if you believe voice